Hi, I'm Oliver, and today we'll learn all about the history of salt. How did salt drive the expansion of the Roman Empire and so many others? How did bustling West African salt and gold markets produce the richest man in history? Learn about the creative ways that salt was mined on top of the Andes Mountains in Peru, on small islands off the coast of Louisiana, by Chinese smugglers dodging the emperor's salt tax, and in the hot and arid Gujarat hinterlands of India. This is Civilization Explained, and I'm your host, Oliver Thamm. In this series, we look at geodata first and explore world history from that perspective. And today is all about salt. Our first main story is about the Roman Empire, Rome's earliest days and its very first conquests. Was Rome founded because of salt? Let's take a look. The white piles on the map represent rock salt, known as halite deposits. Rock salt can result from drying up of enclosed lakes and restricted seas, which later get buried by other sediments. Such salt beds may be hundreds of meters thick and underlie broad areas. Geologic processes can cause them to surface for easy mining or reach the underground groundwater to feed natural brine wells. The deposit near modern-day Volterra feeds brine wells that have been exploited since Neolithic times. Today, the mine produces 150,000 tons of salt every year. These rock salt geodata locations come from the United States Geological Survey dataset called Major Mineral Deposits of the World. Find the link and my processing steps in the video description or on GitHub. The same goes for natural Earth's data about salt deserts known as playas, and for the salt lakes which I derive from the Global Lakes and Wetlands database. Examples from each source for salt will be presented in later stories in this video. For sea salt production, we need three things: an ocean's coast, hot and dry climate, and flat coastal terrain, or even lagoons ideally. The coastline comes from Natural Earth's data too, and the Köppen-Geiger climate zones come from the Veterinärmedizinische Universität Wien, that's in Vienna. I'm still working on extracting suitable coastal terrains and geodata in a processable format and size, but you'll have to wait for that. Additionally, I manually marked historically significant known deposits that are missing. If you would like to help add more, then please join our Patreon community. Meaningful contributions will be awarded with a free membership. Now that you know what's on our map, let's look at early Rome's neighborhood and the local tribes. The Sabines lived in the Apennine Mountains to the northeast. They traded salt between the Tyrrhenian Sea in the west and the Adriatic Sea in the east, and operated the Via Salaria right across. Sabine guards along the Via Salaria reportedly accepted tolls in salt from passing traders, called salarium, which became our modern word salary. On the western coast, the Latins settled. Yes, from the Latin language, and as in Latin America. And the Etruscans to the northwest, who were the most notable civilization in that region at the time. They formed a loose alliance of 12 cities located around Tuscany to the north of Rome and east of the Apennines. The Etruscans were a wealthy and culturally advanced people, and they engaged in extensive trade with Carthage and the Greeks. Their richest and most powerful city is the city of Veii, very close to where Rome is about to be founded. The citizens of Veii and their industry crave a specific product, and that is salt. Top-quality table salt was used as a spice for their lavish feasts and food preservation. In times without refrigeration, fish, meat like salt pork, olives in brines, and vegetables like cabbage and sauerkraut could only be preserved for longer using salt. Our body contains 250 grams of salt and consistently loses it through bodily functions like sweating. We require 1 to 5 grams of salt daily to replenish. Salt contains sodium, an electrolyte that keeps muscles, nerves, and other cells' fluid regulation functioning correctly. On the other hand, too much salt intake is linked with heart disease, high blood pressure, and kidney disease. Meat, fish, eggs, and dairy naturally contain some salt, but vegetables and staple crops contain very little. A diet heavy on the latter requires supplemental salt intake. A deficiency can cause nausea, headache, confusion, tiredness, and worse for many people. Back in the days of whey, lower quality salt was also in high demand. For raising cattle, which requires about 5 times what a human needs, as a flux in metallurgy, for pickling, hides, and leather manufacturing, and for other industrial purposes. All these applications create a continuous demand for salt. In peace times, it was readily available on the markets and very affordable in most places. In the Roman Empire, 1 kilogram of salt costs about 1/6 of a worker's daily wage, and a household used about 50 kilograms per year. Moreover, table salt was used in many Greek, Hebrew, and Roman religious ceremonies, as well as in many other cultures around the world. In the Bible, it features prominently in the fate of Lot's wife, who was turned into a pillar of salt when looking back at Sodom and Gomorrah after God destroyed the land. And Jesus famously called his disciples the salt of the earth. The military was another big customer for salt. Rations for thousands of soldiers had to be preserved and kept in storage. More salt was taken on campaigns to make army bread in the field and preserve foraged food. To keep morale up, tasty salted food and small luxuries like olives and wine were absolutely essential. Uninterrupted and continuous supply of salt, therefore, was a strategic priority goal, much like access to oil and gas is today. So, where do the Veians get their salt from? The only Etruscan production site for salt is located far to the north at Felatri, modern-day Volterra, a small inland and remote area far off the trade routes. For Veians, it is much cheaper to purchase their salt from the Sabine traders along the Via Salaria, much of which is sea salt from shallow lagoons at the mouth of the river Tiber. One was just where the modern Rome Fiumicino airport is located, and the other is overbuilt with housing nowadays. Back then, locals settled in a small town called Ostia. They controlled the seawater inflow with dikes and floodgates and converted these lagoons into sea salt pans using solar evaporation. The ponds were flooded with seawater and then sealed off. When the seawater has evaporated under the sun and the salt has crystallized, it is then harvested. Impurities like calcium and magnesium salts were rinsed out with brine and more seawater. At the time, such salterns were the most common and cheapest way to produce salt in suitable coastal terrain and hot, dry climates. For example, the central and northern Adriatic Sea has plenty of flat coastal land, coastal swamps, and lagoons, such as in Venice. Additionally, it has a 10% higher salinity due to its shallow waters, making it perfect for sea salt production. But along the Tyrrhenian coast, such suitable terrain was scarce, and well-paying customers in Veii and other Etruscan coastal cities were nearby. The perfect setup for a money-printing business. The Ostians generated significant revenue from selling salt, but the flat, poorly defendable terrain made them an attractive target for raids. Naturally, the Ostian salt producers and traders scouted for a more defensible location nearby. They found 7 hills, just a little upstream the Tiber, 7 hours on foot and less than an hour by a boat, right along the Via Salaria. As smart as you are, You probably figured out what I'm suggesting. The salt traders of Ostia built a defensible city up there. However, first let me recount the official founding story of Rome, as it was later taught in the Roman Empire. The brothers Romulus and Remus, both sons of Mars, the god of war, are abandoned by their mother after birth. Nursed by a she-wolf, they are found and adopted by locals. In 759 BC, they founded a new city on the Seven Hills, but eventually fought over how to govern it. Romulus wins, kills Remus, and becomes the first king of Rome. He lends his name to the city and creates the Senate and its institutions. Now, you decide which version to believe. The Senate of Rome elects a new king upon the death of the old one and has various other civic duties. And just like its population, the noble Senate members are more or less evenly split between the three ethnic tribes of the area. You heard that right. The capital of the Roman Empire started as a multi-ethnic community. In 759 BC, Rome was founded as a kingdom, and in 509 BC, it transitioned to a republic after ousting its last king, an Etruscan. During that time, Etruscan civilization expanded to the Po Valley, Campania, and the island of Corsica. Its city-states were often at war and frequently allied with Rome. Etruscan political influence on Rome was omnipresent. Around 400 BC, then, the Etruscans came under pressure. From the north by Gallic tribes who settled in the Po Valley and pushed them out, and from the south by Greeks who established new colonies further and further north, and from Rome, which in 396 BC sacked its longtime rival and much bigger and wealthier neighbor, the city of Veii. More on that in just a minute. Stripped of its most powerful city and its colonies, the Etruscan alliance is severely weakened. At that time, Brennus, a Gaul leader of the tribe of the Senones, crossed the Apennines. A picturesque Gallic leader with a fancy helmet and fancy beard and naked torso, of course, just as one would imagine, huh? He lays siege on the city of Clevsine and later marches on Rome. North of Rome, he defeats the Romans, and the surviving defenders retreat to recently captured Veii. Brennus sacks all the hills of Rome except for the Capitol Hill. Thanks to sleepy Roman guards, he almost sacked it too, but the holy geese of Juno, living around the temple, loudly honked the Roman defenders awake and saved the day. Eventually, the starved and plague-ridden Romans agreed to pay a ransom to the equally afflicted Gauls, 1,000 pounds of gold. After they agreed, Brennus just redefined what a pound was, and when the Romans complained, Brennus uttered his famous words, "Vae victis, woe to the conquered." So, which hero will come and save the day for Rome? A man going by the magnificent name of Marcus Furius Camillus. Marcus, in 396 BC, was declared a dictator, which is an emergency general, following a series of Roman military setbacks, including the prolonged siege of Veii. Veii is a walled and well-defended city on top of a hill plateau. Marcus decides to let sappers cut a tunnel into the soft rock under the city. He launched an assault with regular troops from all sides to distract the Veans. When they rushed out to the walls, the sappers and most elite troops broke through right at the central temple of Juno and slaughtered the Veian defenders from behind. This move built Marcus Furius Camillus' fame. After discovering the magnificent wealth of the Veians, Marcus decided to spare the population, sack the city, and integrate it with Rome. Unfortunately, Marcus was later accused of embezzlement, and exiled to a small town called Ardea. His first contact with Brennus's Gauls is when a supply troop pillages near Ardea. Marcus recruits a troop of townsmen, raids the unsuspecting Gauls' camp at night, and kills them all in their sleep. Half the Gallic army was gone. Back in Veii, the Roman commander of the surviving defenders of Rome recruits a new army. He fences off approaching Etruscan armies who try to recapture Veii at this time of weakness. The commander got Marcus Furius Camillus reinstated, assigned him more troops, and tasked him with liberating Rome. Marcus arrives at the very last second. The deal of the 1,000 pounds of gold had already been signed, but the gold was not handed over yet. Marcus intervenes and utters his legendary reply to Brennus: "Non auro sed ferro recuperanda est patria." Not by gold, but by iron is the nation to be recovered. Marcus furiously defeats Brennus on the battlefield, and for more than 800 years, Brennus remains the only person to sack Rome. Rome retained its gold, maintained control of the incredibly wealthy and technologically advanced city of Veii, and dominated the region's salt trade. Marcus Furius Camillus' military successes laid the foundation for Rome's slow but steady conquest and assimilation of all the Etruscan city-states, completed in 264 BC. This is 132 years after the fall of Veii, 30 years after the conquest of all Latin and Sabine territories in central Italy, and 10 years after the Pyrrhic Wars, which resulted in the capture of all the Greek settlements in southern Italy. Another 100 years later, the Romans sacked and destroyed their then biggest rival's capital, Carthage. And no, they did not salt the soil afterwards. That is a 20th century legend. The Roman Republic later expanded to encompass the entire Mediterranean world. Its foundation, I argue, is entirely based on salt, and military geniuses like Marcus Furius Camillus. Another method used by the Romans on the coast of the North Sea was to burn salty peat. The region is too cold and too wet for efficient solar evaporation in salt pans. The Romans dug out peat at the mouths of large rivers like the Rhine and the Thames in England. Dried peat is excellent fuel for cooking and heating, but very labor-intensive to harvest. The salty peat of the North Sea was burned and its ashes were collected. The ashes were mixed into seawater, into a brine. The water was then cooked off in a kettle by a fire fueled by more salty peat, and the cycle continues. The resulting salt from this procedure can be a bit brown and a bit bitter, though. This method was scaled up in medieval times by the local Frisian people on the coasts of modern Germany and the Netherlands, and made them very, very wealthy at the time. But what happens if there are no sources for salt at all? Scandinavia has no significant rock salt deposits and is too cold and too humid to harvest sea salt effectively. The Baltic Sea is brackish and its salt concentration is very low. For Sweden, therefore, even the very expensive approach to cook seawater brine with wood fires was not an option. Sweden always depended on salt imports and good trade relationships with leaders in what's now Germany and Poland. Isolationism, to them, was just never an option, and the trade continuously fostered intellectual and technological modernization. So, good for them. Moving on from Europe, let me tell you how salt made the richest man who ever lived. I am speaking of the Mansa Musa of the Kingdom of Mali, famous for his lavish spending and gifts during his 1324 pilgrimage to Mecca called the Hajj. Mansa Musa had so much gold that in modern times it would be equivalent to $400 billion, all in liquid assets. As of April 2025, this is still slightly ahead of Elon Musk and almost twice what Jeff Bezos has. His empire Mali was south of the Sahara Desert, in the center of which lies the vast salt flat of Tagaza. Further south are the rich gold deposits of West Africa, still exploited today. Along the large Niger River lie cities of Oriental legends like Djenné, Gao, and Timbuktu. Further west was the capital of the former empire of Ghana, called Kumbi-Zale. More rich markets for gold, salt, and luxuries were in Walata and Meli, the city of kings. A caravan track from Timbuktu or Walata to the salt mining town Tagaza, deep into the Sahara Desert, took 3 weeks, with little to no opportunities to resupply water or food. That is 3 times the duration of the moon landing mission. And it took just as long to cross the desert to the north, to the oasis of Tamentit, a popular resting point when heading to the bustling market towns of Sijilmassa, Kairouan, or as far as Morocco, the Mediterranean port cities, Egypt, or even Arabia. So, how is it possible to make that long trip through the desert? The answer is camels, oases, and hardy people of the desert. The caravan routes led along strings of oases used to resupply food and for camels to drink water. And new breeds of camels from Morocco could carry heavier loads than ever. This enabled the Berber people, who controlled most of the caravan trade, to move food, supplies, dates, iron, copper tools, and the finest luxury products from the Mediterranean and the Arab world south to Mali and pick up salt and Tagaza on the way. They returned north with copious amounts of gold, but also ivory and likely slaves. Most salt for gold trade happened directly between Walata, Timbuktu, and Tagaza. It made Tagaza so teeming with gold dust that reportedly salt was exchanged 1-to-1 for its weight in gold. While this was probably an exaggeration, it tells us a few things. That gold was so plentiful in West Africa that it wasn't valued very highly, but salt was rare and hard to come by. For more details on gold in Mali and more examples of society that did and did not consider gold very valuable, and why, check out my next episode on gold. Subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications to never miss new episodes. The Maliempire did not directly control the gold or salt mining. Instead, it collected market fees, tributes, and taxes from miners and traders. Let's take a quick tour of what these bustling markets, oases, and salt mines may have looked like. We'll start with a modern picture of the market in front of the Great Mosque of Djenné, the largest mud brick building in the world. It replaced an older mosque at the same site, so the scenery may have looked similar in the 14th century. Gao was described as a regional power already in the 9th century AD, and as an important commercial center for the trans-Saharan trade. It is said to be Muslim from the 10th century on. Kumbi-Zale was the capital of the ancient Ghana Empire, had plentiful markets and rich agriculture. Only a short trip away was the terminus town of the salt for gold route Walata. To the north, the small salt mining town of Tagaza was described by travelers as an arid place with brackish water, hosting just a few hundred residents. Workers dug pits, removed several layers of dirt, and more layers of poor quality salt, and below that they carved slabs of top quality salt out of the ground. They traded them to the caravans for supplies, dates, mining equipment, and gold. Leaving north, caravans headed to the oasis town of Tamentit. From this modern picture, you can imagine what it may have looked like as a bustling oasis town in the 13th or 14th century. The greens on the left are date palms. Dates were a great luxury and essential export of oasis towns. Eventually, the caravans reached Zijilmassa, which is mainly in ruins today. At the time, it was one of the wealthiest market cities in the entire North Africa. Further out on the caravan network are the legendary markets of Marrakesh and Fez in Morocco, or Kairouan and Tunis in modern-day Tunisia. This is the trade network that made Mansa Musa even richer than any of his predecessors. Given that today's buying power of gold is still in the same ballpark as in the 14th century Europe, he can be easily compared and legitimately called the richest man who ever lived. He came to power in 1312 AD after his predecessor Mansa Abu Bakr II just never returned from a sea voyage expedition to find the western end of the Atlantic Ocean. They brought supplies for years and gold and luxury products to trade. Well, legend has it that some of them made it and their ancestors still live on the coast of South America. Mansa Musa, after taking the throne, turned to the east instead. He expanded the Maliempire to the east and conquered Timbuktu and Gao. This way, Mansa Musa monopolized the gold for salt trade, making him and his entire empire richer than ever. With that wealth, Mansa Musa sought to expand ties with more advanced Muslim civilizations and their leaders of the time. He started new mosques around the entire empire and turned Mali into a center of Muslim learning and leadership. His legendary Hajj pilgrimage then, of 1324, spanned 6,500 kilometers and lasted 2 years. His caravan started with an incredible amount of gold that he handed out freely to random bystanders, but also as generous gifts to local leaders. So much that it collapsed the gold prices along his route and stunned the Arab world for centuries to come. I will elaborate more on his Hajj in my episode on gold. Subscribe so you won't miss it. But since we focus on salt today, I will leave it at that. In conclusion, the monopolized trans-Sahara salt for gold trade created the richest man in history, Mansa Musa, the king of the Empire of Mali. From unfathomable riches, we moved to a society that did not even use money. To the Incas in South American Andes, salt was also very important. In salt brine pans at 3,200 meters of elevation, today called the Salineras de Maras, salt was mined centuries before the Incas and still is today. The Salineras are just 50 kilometers away from the capital Cusco, in the original region of the Inca, and at the heart and center of their political and economic power. The salt produced has a high quality and quantity yield in the dry season, from May to October, and less so in the wet season. Highly saline brine flows from a rocksalt deposit into solar evaporation ponds terraced into the mountainsides. Per month, the pans are flooded multiple times and harvested once. The top layer is top quality kitchen salt. The lower layers are for industrial use and livestock. Since the Inca didn't use any money, the salt during the Inca times was distributed regionally and bartered for reciprocal services or agricultural products from the south at regular product exchange fairs. Instead of using money and raising taxes, every citizen owed a certain number of labor days to their ruler, the Sapa Inca. In return, they received all the salt they needed throughout the year. From up in the Andes Mountains, we go down to a tiny island at the mouth of the Mississippi River in modern-day Louisiana, where local tribes produced salt for centuries before even Europeans arrived. The coastal tribes boiled briny spring water from a rock salt deposit, which is very close to the surface. The salt was traded mostly to agriculturalist tribes up and down the Mississippi River, as far up as Ohio and Illinois, but also to the west to Texas and Arkansas. In the USGS data, you can see 4 more salt domes in the region, which all came from the same geological process. Then, after the Civil War of the United States, rock salt was first mined on Avery Island using shafts, tunnels, and galleries. It was sold for $9 per barrel, significantly cheaper than any competition at the time. From these modern tales, we'll move on to salt production sites in Asia that date back 5,000 years. There are 2 stories from China, but we'll start with the groundwater brines of India in the modern-day region of Gujarat. Gujarat is one of the hottest places in India. It produces 80% of India's total salt today, mostly from sea salt pans along the coast, similar to those in Ostia. Gujarat has plenty of suitable terrain and is extremely hot, sunny, and dry. The large salt flat further inland is called Run of Kutch and formed by the Agaria people who harvest the salt from groundwater brine pumped up into solar evaporation ponds. The Run of Kutch was a part of the Arabian Sea in Roman times, navigable by ships. It dried up because some of the main tributaries to the river that feed into the Run of Kutch changed course due to the geological uplifting of the whole region. Today, it is a seasonal salt desert that gets flooded in the monsoon season. The Agaria people prepare ponds and dig wells from October to July. They pump the briny groundwater into the salt pans and harvest it as the water evaporates. More salt was imported into India from rock salt deposits in the north of modern-day Pakistan, the famous pink Himalayan salt. There, in mines, slabs of salt are directly carved out of the rock. Earlier, salt also used to come from salt lakes in the Tibetan plateau via Nepal, where it was bartered for agricultural products and Indian luxury products. But when cheaper Gujarat salt reached northern India, that trade stopped. On the other side of the Himalayan mountains lie the rock salt deposits and brine aquifers of Zhejiang in the Sichuan province of China. While roughly 80% of Chinese salt were produced in seawater salt pans at the Bohai Bay near Beijing and also near Tianjin, the hinterland provinces of China needed closer and therefore cheaper sources of salt. In the Zhejiang area, the brine has an extremely high salinity of about 50 grams per liter. This makes it economically viable to cook off the water using wood fires. In the 19th century, natural gas was discovered and piped to Zhejiang through hollowed-out bamboo pipes. This revitalized salt production after most of the nearby forests had already been used up. In central China, Zhejiang salt is considered equal or even better than the fleurdesel from France and Himalayan salt from Pakistan. Marco Polo, who traveled to China in the 13th century, had another comment and observation on the Chinese well salt. He said, "These rascals have none of the great Khan's paper money, but they use salt instead." His Khan was the Mongol emperor of the Yuan dynasty, ruling China at the time, and salt as a currency in that region continued until the 19th century roughly. Talking about salt and money, my final story for today is about the legendary emperor Wu of Han and China's furiously debated salt tax schemes. The history of Chinese salt taxes goes back all the way to the mythical Chinese emperor Yu the Engineer. He levied one of the first recorded taxes in history, which was a tax on salt. We'll hear more of him in a future episode on waterways. Subscribe so you won't miss it. The first Chinese dynasty that we definitely know existed is called the Shang dynasty, around 1600 BC. And they already had petty salt officers mentioned on oracle bones. Oracle bones are usually the shoulder bones of larger mammals, into which rulers who possess the mandate of heaven would carve questions and throw them into a fire multiple times. The cracks of the bones would then be interpreted, and the results were often carved into them as well. They were consulted on future decisions of war and peace, trade, and other issues, which makes them helpful documents for archaeologists. In the 4th century BC then, in texts called the Guanzi, philosophers who usually held powerful political offices in China argued vividly about the nature of taxes and the nature of government on the occasion of a proposed salt monopoly at the time. I am quoting philosopher Guanzhang. If you were going to issue an order like, I am going to collect head money upon all your people, both adults and children, they would have certainly remonstrated loudly and angrily against you. However, if you take firm control over the policy unsolved, the people cannot manage to dodge it, even though you are going to take a profit of 100 times over. 300 years later then, there was the widest reaching control of the salt trade by Emperor Wu of Han in 119 BC, our main character of the story. In 142 BC, Emperor Wu ascended to the throne at age 15 and ruled China for 54 years, expanding China greatly. He started his reign with an attempt at an extensive anti-corruption government reform, which was then squashed by nobles and his powerful grandmother, the Empress Du. 7 years and countless palace intrigues later, she died, making way for Wu's reforms that cemented his power and benefited the empire greatly. In 119 BC, Emperor Wu financed his expansionist military campaigns with a decree for salt and iron to be state monopolies. This is the earliest state monopoly for salt production that we have a record of. Emperor Wu did this to eliminate a threat to his power from the wealthy salt traders of the time, but also to get a significant revenue stream for the state to fund his expansionist military campaigns. Wu first conquered the south of China and then defeated northern nomad warriors, opening up the Silk Road for trade, and eventually subdued the north of Korea. After Emperor Wu died in 87 BC, the philosophical debate about the nature of taxes and government began anew, initiated by his successor in the discourses on salt and iron. Multiple times, the monopolies and taxes were relaxed and reinstated afterwards. When funds were low or a new war had to be financed, the salt tax or monopoly would always be a go-to. Each time a state monopoly on salt was reinstated, smuggling and black markets would thrive. This reduced government profits, so prices were raised even more and smuggling increased further. Up to 2/3 of the salt was contraband at times. The monopoly systems typically collapsed after some time, but allowed government officials in charge of salt trade to live in great luxury while they lasted. The 17th century writer Pu Zongling caught this cynicism when he remarked that what the state defines as illegal is which does not follow its rule, while officials and merchants labeled as smuggling that which they do not smuggle themselves. And in his short story, The Salt Smuggler, he writes, those, however, whom the greedy officials and corrupt traders of today denounce as unlicensed traders, are among the most virtuous of mankind, needy unfortunates who struggle to save a few cash in the purchase of their pint of salt. So if you feel like your government is overreaching, well, you are not alone in history. The Chinese have had this discussion for 2,000 years, and most other places had it too. And we probably will have it for another 2,000 years, I guess. If you're looking for a way out, support soldai.org for a modern, data-driven approach to this problem. Check the links below and consider joining our community on Patreon. And now, reading glasses on, because here are my book recommendations. My first one is Salt, A World History by Mark Kurlansky. It's the de facto standard book on the history of salt, and if you like my accessible approach to explain history with anecdotes, then this one will definitely be for you. My second one is Naomi Dogood's The Miracle of Salt, Recipes and Techniques to Preserve, Ferment, and Transform Your Food. It has great pictures, great stories about salt and preservation of food, and it has absolutely brilliant recipes from her, a James Beard Award winner. So check it out, it's absolutely great. Find the links down there in the description and enjoy the read. As well, check out my detailed blog post with all content pieces about salt and fun facts quiz. If you have more salt facts from the region that you live in, please drop those or any questions in the comments. To support me and this channel, please consider gifting the official Salt Episode Tee to a dear friend or a family member maybe. And please use my affiliate links for your salt shopping. Thank you so much. Please don't forget to like this video so more people see it, and subscribe to this channel so you won't miss new episodes. Thanks for helping me grow my audience. That's it for today, and see you again soon.